Welcome to The Power of the Here and Now and How to Find It by the Crisses at Plural Positivity World Conference 2024. This talk is based on the premise that all of our power and control is in this moment, in the here and now. Potentially troubling content will include news about a bear with signs of PTSD, the physiological nature of trauma to understand challenges with body-based presence techniques, sensory information and triggers, mentions of terms and language used in instructions or guided exercises, mentions of spiritual concepts as pertains to the origins of time sense, trauma, mindfulness, and presence techniques, time being potentially circular or cyclical, and how to help headmates who are trapped in traumatime. Who are the Crisses? We came up with our name because of the saying, there are many Crisses in Criss. And we are situated in the unceded lands of the Lenape tribespeople in what is currently known as the Hudson Valley of New York in the U.S. We're not on camera due to our own trauma history. Our Liberated Life Coaching business logo is a phoenix flying out of a ring of fire. Our system icon is usually an eye with our headmates looking out of it. We are life coaches, content creators, and authors. We're a mixed origin system and usually say quadgenic because it's too complicated. We've been out as many in one body for some 38 years and on the internet since 1996. And our original website evolved into kinhost.org and was opened up as a wiki for contributions from the community. We are also former web developers and host several plural community sites, including pluralityresource.org, where folks can put up online courses by and for plurals and more. Today, our presentation will be addressing many issues around time perception, time loss, headmates in traumatime, and the usefulness of presence skills, the place they have, and how to achieve presence in unconventional ways. Somatic means of the body. We do think that our body is a system member, and listening to our body is as important as listening to other system members. But there are specific challenges in being in touch with our body when we have kind of this rift between our body and being able to communicate with it. So we have separated ourselves from our body sometimes. And we'll talk about why we might have done that when we're talking about the physiology of trauma. So there are different parts of being in the here and now that touch on being with our body, being in the same space as our body, being in touch with our body, that can be troubling. So here's some terminology around dealing with body-based stuff. Somatic memories. Our trauma is physiological, so our body remembers what happened to us. Not only physical memories, but also the environment that we were in when traumas happened. So our body also stores other sensory information outside of the specific trauma itself. And we learn about that in The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, but also there's been a lot of other, let's say, proof and evidence to back that up. Somatic triggers are when those circumstances that were around the traumatic event exist in our life in the here and now. So when we smell coffee, we like using that as an example. When we smell coffee, it brings us back to all the times that we smelled coffee when our egg donor was around. So our body will then ramp up our hypervigilance and try to do everything it can to prevent us from being abused again. somatic flashbacks. That's when our body is re-experiencing the body memories from a traumatic event. And then there's certain techniques within presence themselves that are based around somatic principles, which we're going to call earthing. So there are body-based earthing techniques. The not so wonderful word that's probably a problem for most people for those techniques is grounding. And there's reasons that that word in itself, outside of this meaning, might also be a trigger. So we're avoiding it by calling those earthing, getting in touch with the earth, bringing our energy down to the ground or the floor or a connection with it. Those would be things that are more earthing techniques. So the first thing we'd like to do is talk about triggers, because a lot of presence techniques when we're in therapy and in groups is suggestions of things that may be somatic in nature. If we understand why those might become triggering, maybe we can learn how to avoid them. So one of our talks is called Anatomy of a Trigger, and we're going to give the ultra short version of it. So science has uncovered that trauma reactions are physiological issues with mental and cognitive effects. And after the traumatic incident, our nervous system goes back and memorizes the circumstances leading up to the incident. This is the map of a traumatic event. And here we have a timeline that's going off into the future. And the black line here is our anxiety level. When the timeline starts out, our anxiety is low. This would be before we have a traumatic event. And our anxiety level is low. It's at our former baseline. And then things start getting maybe out of control. Something is going on, and maybe our anxiety is starting to ramp up. Then there's an actual traumatic event. So something happens, our anxiety level shoots way up into the panic range, and as time is going on, the incident ends and we start coming down slowly. And you can see the recovery window takes longer. And then we end up at a higher level than our baseline, leaving this graph, which is the hypervigilance we have after the event. So there's this window of the actual trauma itself. Then there's the recovery window where our anxiety is coming down. Our hypervigilance is higher than our baseline. So this is the top part of this graph here is showing our anxiety level. Okay, so the bottom part of this diagram is the stuff that's going on physiologically beneath the scenes, beneath the surface, as we're leaving the traumatic event. While we're leaving the traumatic event, we don't have PTSD yet. Not really. There's a certain amount of time, and it ends eventually, where our body is actually harvesting the signs from before it happened. The nervous system says, how can I make sure that this never happens again? This traumatic event, this whatever it was. And as we're leaving the traumatic event, our nervous system starts kind of going through its memory or recordings of bodily things or things in our environment and starts harvesting any kind of sensory information, any situational information. And so it goes back over our memories of what led into that traumatic event, and memorizes all these different circumstances and sensory stuff. And it holds on to them in nerve bundles. So then, as it's harvesting all of those things, it starts to make new nervous system bundles or trauma pathways that will help it know and measure risk, basically. Essentially, it's there to predict risks in the future, to prepare for similar traumatic incidents in the future or do everything it can to avoid those similar situations from ever happening again. That's what triggers are. Triggers are signs our nervous system has memorized to warn us when we need to be more and more avoidant, or as those signs start showing up, more and more hypervigilant to make sure other signs don't start lining up and making sure that we're not needing to kind of either fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and all those things to avoid the next incident. So that's what triggers are. Triggers are actually stored in the nervous system, in nervous system pathways associated with that specific trauma. When the traumatic incident has happened, we don't yet have PTSD, but once we have those trauma pathways, as our body is harvesting all of those signs, the warning signs of a potential trauma event, that's when we start having the avoidance, we start having the hypervigilance, and start having the panic reactions when those signs start lining up. So this leads to the hypervigilance and anxiety we might have. Like if it happened on a sunny day and every day is sunny, then we're already at a low level of hypervigilance because, last time it was sunny and now it's sunny. Oh, but then we smell coffee and, but last time it happened, there was coffee. Even if it wasn't last time, like last time we smelled coffee, everything might have been fine, but, it goes back to when things weren't fine. So the autonomic nervous system kind of harvests all these things to feed into its own little prediction machine. It's, we call it the broken crystal ball, so that it can anticipate the future. So it's kind of looking into its own little crystal ball of all these stored up things to try to predict what's going to happen next. So the types of information that are harvested for triggers by our nervous system is anything that we've seen, heard, tasted, touched, smelled. Our sense of time, like time of year, time of day, seasonality, and such. The situation, the state that we are in, like when I get nervous, XYZ happens. So the situation or the state that we're in, our emotions, our thoughts, the place that we are in, so where we are, the people around us or the other objects around us, events that are going on. One of our triggers is our anniversary of our day of birth. So it can be around events. So anything that our body might harvest can be harvested into those trauma reactions. Triggers, here and now versus there and then. One of the interesting things about triggers, the nervous system memorizes that past state to try to predict the future, like we were just saying. And we can pay attention to try to pull back from those reactions, to try to lower the hypervigilance, start paying attention to what's different now. Like, okay, Crisses, yes, we just smelled coffee, but it's 2024 and we're 55 years old and our egg donor is 1,000 miles away, and to anchor more in the here and now by paying attention to the things that are different. We live alone, blah, blah, blah. And we can use the here and now for reality checking. Like we can actually look around and say, well, is Bertha here? Our egg donor here? No, she's not. Well, what if our body may be saying, but what if she shows up? Well, we can close the door in her face. We're adults now. We can actually say, no, I don't want to talk to you if she calls on the phone. So we can plan. We can have a plan. So we wanted to let you know before we go to the next slide. The next slide is the one with the bear. And it's just a still photo of her at her new sanctuary, but she obviously has PTSD. So this is Ina. This is a still photo from a video on Ina, who was in a Romanian zoo until around 2014, kept in her cage with her sister, and they had a small pond and a very small space to walk in. Now Ina is at a reserve run by Liberty Bear Sanctuary in Romania, and she has her own individual shelter. She has these outdoor areas with other bears to walk around. And this is her obviously still walking in circles when she's really stressed. So whenever she's got, whatever triggers happen for her, she literally goes back to the time when she was in the cage. Even though she's free to walk around and she's got a nice pond and other bears to play with, she still would walk in these circles whenever she was triggered. So she would go back to the time, and it's so obvious that poor Ina is stuck in time. A parent in this case, when we're in trauma time, we get not only maybe somatic memories come up or we have emotional flashbacks, we can actually literally go back in time to where the trauma happened, and the same limitations and the same expectations. And so the bars of the cage don't have to be there anymore for us to be trapped by those memories. In terms of the terminology we're using, here and now is our present place and time, where and when our body currently is. The there and then is basically any time our consciousness is not attached to the here and now. So if our nervous system is in prediction mode and it's taking us on a journey into the future and we're ruminating about what's going to happen tomorrow, or we're thinking about something that's coming next week, we're no longer in the here and now. Our consciousness is floating around, or we're in the past and we're thinking through our regrets and if only we could have done things differently. Then our consciousness is not in the here and now. So being in the here and now is when our consciousness is with our physical body in the now, the right now. Trauma time is a place of flashbacks. When we're with Ina and we're in our past where the things happened and we're re-experiencing those traumatic perceptions or feelings. But it's also the place that the stuck and lost headmates, we'll get to in a moment, spend their time most of the time. Presence is that sense of how connected we are to the here and now. It's the opposite of being dissociated from place and time. So if I'm dissociated and I'm not in the room, maybe several feet away from my body in the room, or I'm overly concerned about something going on somewhere else, I'm not really associating with where I am right now. And stuck and lost are those headmates that are stuck in trauma time, or they're lost somewhere else in the there and then, and they can't get out without assistance. So there are some headmates that are not as stuck and not as lost, who have maybe 1 foot in trauma time and 1 foot in the here and now, who don't need as much assistance. But then there are those who are absolutely taken by the illusion that it's still happening and they're stuck, and those flashbacks keep going around and around for them. They are still making circles even though the cage isn't still there. One of the reasons that we're doing this is to help everyone in the community understand more about trauma time. Trauma time is the subjective experience of what parts of us or what headmates have been stuck in time and space. Psychology does not include subjective experience. Some call it a pseudoscience. It's trying to understand everything from an external point of view, from something kind of like a medical point of view, an observational point of view, a objective point of view. So it's more the ableist looking in on our behavior more than them asking us about our experiences and documenting our experiences. They'll say that clients self-report certain things because they can hear the self-reports, but they won't say the client experiences it. It's just that we say it. That's the big difference. So once we go outside of Western medicine, many traditions actually document the experiential part of it and view trauma as an impact that dislodges some part of us, an essential part of our being, and that parts of us get stuck in the experience of what happened. So, for example, lost innocence, lost sense of security, or losing the sense of who we were before the trauma. The lived experience of dissociation is real and valid. We are quite literally not all here. Some part of us is outside of this time and place. In shamanic traditions, lost essence is literally stuck in the world as it existed back then. So depending on how much life essence a person, or in this case a headmate, has lost, they may be more in the here and now or more in the there and then. Traditions that think of trauma this way also acknowledge that significant trauma causes chronic illness, often in proportion to the lost essence. So, for example, Jing loss in traditional Chinese medicine. To pluralize these ideas, we're looking at the headmates as individual people in our system. Some headmates have so little essence remaining in the here and now that they can't consciously find their way back to front or to interact with the rest of our system in a co-conscious way. Or they get triggered front due to trauma triggers, and that ends up bridging the here and now with the trauma time they came from. And so we all end up reliving the past in various types of flashbacks, emotional flashbacks, somatic flashbacks, until the headmate recedes back into trauma time fully, back into the there and then. And when there's so little of them in the here and now, so little of them co-conscious with us, so little of them able to access front or oriented to space and time, they really could use our help. So for an example, in our system, we had two headmates now named Nikki and Sean. Nikki and Sean were so much more in the there and then, in the trauma time, that our experience of them was kind of this shell, this unable to communicate with the representation that was there in our headspace. And so much more of them was stuck in space and time that we had to go on a long journey through our inner world, but also through to that place and time where they were stuck, and ask them if they wanted to come back. So we'll talk a little bit more as we're going through the presentation about what that is like. So for example, if you have a statue of some entity in your system and it's not responsive to conversation and it doesn't move, that could be that tiny little bit that's remaining of that headmate that can be represented in your system, but their consciousness, their will to exist, their ability to move, etc., is not here. And we could possibly find their actual essence if we can figure out how to follow back from that representation in our headspace to where they really are. Becoming more present is a recovery affirming strategy. So by pulling more of our collective essence as a system into the here and now, we can have lower anxiety and less intrusions and less emotional flashbacks and being more present. And so the first thing to do is work on making the here and now safer. So we can do a bunch of things that affirm that it's no longer the past and that it is now today. Decorating our apartment, putting artwork around our spaces that we created, eliminating things that might be triggering or remind us of unsafe situations, maybe having more assertiveness or control over situations where we have to be in contact with people that are not necessarily safe for us to deal with. Those are all ways that we can make the here and now safer, and we can work on safety plans so that we have strategies for when we are hypervigilant or anxious, and ways to do self-care and to lower our anxiety level and lower our hypervigilance and so on. Supporting those headmates who can become more present. So those who have one foot in the there and then, or one foot in trauma time and one foot in the here and now, who are able to communicate at times and sometimes may go, off into trauma loops. So we can support them coming more into the present. Oh, and help them with the realizations that they are in the past. So we can provide evidence and support, like some ways of proving that we're not a kid anymore, even if they're a headmate who's a system kid, but proving that we as a whole are not a child anymore, that we're safe now, and such. And also providing support for those headmates that are working on coming into the here and now. And in case anybody is worried about rescuing headmates or bringing them into the here and now, somehow being threatening because it might make you have a higher head count, in these cases, we're definitely talking about system members that are already there and they're not able to get into the here and now. So we're not creating new headmates. We're helping dig the headmates who are stuck in the rubble of our trauma to get out from underneath the rubble. Once they're out from underneath the rubble, we now have more resources to work on the rubble, right? So we're not looking to necessarily cure the trauma reaction first. We're actually looking to free up the headmate first. Once they're starting to heal and starting to grow and becoming more capable and blossoming with all of their talents and stuff like that, then we get to really find out who they are and what their talents are, and get them out from under the weight of that trauma and help them to become who they really are underneath the trauma, right? We can work together to do the rest of the healing work. But we do think it's important to get consent from folks as much as possible and leverage our inner world to assist with folks coming into the present, which leads us to rescue missions. So rescue mission is if we can't communicate with somebody who's almost fully in trauma time, like we were talking about Nikki and Sean. They were not in our shared headspace. They were somewhere else in space and time, and they needed help. So we got together some care packages, which we'll talk a bit more about in a second. Got together some care packages, got together some teams of several headmates, and we followed that little thread from their representation in our system down to where the trauma was. That's a complicated idea, but let's just say, it's kind of like climbing into a memory. So it's no longer really the inner world. It's this other place in space and time. And maybe it's spiritual, and maybe it's metaphorical, and maybe whatever. It doesn't really matter so long as the job gets done. So we go to, let's say, for one of them, let's say either of them wants to share. For Sean, we went back to our apartment when we were a school-age kid and went through a few metaphorical, almost like if you ever watch like Hercules, the Disney movie, or if you think of like ancient mythology, the Minotaur's labyrinth and all these things, they're very metaphorical, and there's challenges along the way and maybe some puzzles to do and things like that. So it's kind of like that. We had a few challenges to get through to get in. We got into the apartment. We figured out where she was. We went and asked if she wanted to be rescued. In this case, she said yes. Had she not said yes, we would have left the care packages. Then we would take our leave without her, but reminding her that we really care and we would love to meet her and hope she can join us and things like that. Then we return back, to our headspace with, in this case, a child. And helped her, get tended to and heal from there. Assign like caregivers, at least temporarily, and help her to heal, and so on. So a care package is, in terms of a rescue mission, the bundle of things that we bring with us into the rescue mission. It's kind of like our compromise, but if we can't get consent, we leave this gift, maybe a backpack or whatever, or a duffel bag full of tools and comfort items, shelter, warming devices like blankets, communication devices. It all depends on the technology we use in our system. Are they magical? Are they technological, etc.? We leave maps so they could find their way back. Maybe light sources, snacks, anything that we can think of that might help them. A walkie-talkie, something, so that they can either get in touch with us to come and try again, or so that they can actually follow the maps and find their own way. So the wonderful thing about this is it kind of disrupts the loops, the trauma loops that they're going to be going through in the trauma time. So the trauma time, their experience of it is just that the bad thing keeps happening, and they have all these feelings. Sometimes those feelings leak into our awareness and we have emotional flashbacks, but that usually means somebody is trapped in a flashback somewhere. And so the trauma time is the flashback from the subjective point of view. So her being trapped in our bedroom was her hiding behind the bed, really, was her hiding from some traumatic stuff that was going on in the apartment. To her, let's say it was arguing in the next room, she's hiding from that. And it's happening over and over again, and she's distressed. So we come in, we're already disrupting the flashback by just even showing up. And we ask if she's ready to be rescued and wants to come with us. In this case, she said yes. But if she had said no, we would leave this bundle before coming back to front or coming back to our here and now body. We would leave all this stuff with her. And that also disrupts the flashbacks because now she's got this package of tools and this obvious difference, I guess, in the loops now. So in and of itself, just even leaving the care package can be health affirming and reminders of the fact that it's 2024 and not back in those days of trauma. When we bring somebody back, we want to set them up for success and to feel welcomed and belonged. So we will often have a welcoming committee. We might assign a buddy to them and have them pair up with kind of somebody with more experience or somebody they feel safe with or whatever. One of our newest system members was Carpenter. Carpenter's this large ant centaur-ish creature. And Carpenter felt very uncomfortable being in a mammal body, so Carpenter's buddy was our dragon Ruth. And it's like, oh, look, we both have 6 limbs. We both have armor on the outside. We're both cold-blooded. Doesn't that feel better, So they, buddied up. So Carpenter and Ruth have been hanging out more. Time in itself is a cultural concept. So as plurals, we can learn to view time differently at different times. And different headmates can have very different experiences of time. These are some of the concepts that we have around time. So there's chronos, time, the time that's measured on a clock, 24 hours in a day and 365 or 6 days a year. There's kairos time, which is the memorable moments and embracing the opportunities for enjoying or our time and our flow and mindfulness. Kairos is unplugged from measuring time. Then there's cyclical time, so that there's repeating patterns that we might notice in life. The routines and the rhythms that we have, the days, the seasons that keep coming back again. 24 hours later, I'm going to be doing more or less the same thing. And that can be either comforting for some people. Some people really love routine and rhythms. And then it could also be a little uncomfortable for us because we have more of the DPDR that happens around, is this the first time I was in this elevator or the 100th time I was in this elevator problem? We have the derealization issue. That concept, the cyclical nature of time, is very strong in indigenous Mayan and Mesoamerican cultures, where they look at things very much from a cyclical angle. And then there's a more transient view of time. Even if this is the first or the 100th time I've been in this elevator, it is not the same. There are definitely two different moments of being in the elevator. Everything being different and new and transient and so on. And that's the Japanese concept of wabi-sabi. We'll talk much more about presence from here out. So presence is the art of working towards being more in the here and now and engaged with the present. It doesn't have to be 100% in the here and now and engaged with the present. We're not looking for perfection, but we are looking to get the benefits of being more present rather than perfectly present. There's the G word, trying not to mention, which is connecting to the earth. And it's kind of thought in a kind of spiritual sense, similar to an electrical outlet, where extra energies or anxieties can flow into the earth. So it can also be called earthing. Centering, which is actually more of a mental art of presence, pulling all of our mental and physical attention back to center, which is usually thought to be like the center of our body-mind. And then there's mindfulness, which is being more fully and completely in this one moment. So it's more a time sense without judgment. So mindfulness is like, I am with my thoughts, but I am not my thoughts. I am with this moment, with my body. I'm like bringing my thoughts to the things that I'm with at the moment. There's benefits to working on our presence skills. When we are more present, we can reduce anxiety, manage our emotions a little better. Because our anxiety is reduced, other symptoms will go down, including things like dissociative symptoms. We can also improve our spoon health, our energy level, and our resilience, if you will. So our spoons may improve. Because we're more in the here and now to record it, so it might actually improve our access and our recording of memory. So it might improve our memory. Generally speaking, presence helps our self-awareness. So it's not just to manage our emotions, but also to be aware of them and aware of our thoughts. So it can help with self-awareness. Presence helps us with intention. If I want to do something, when am I going to do it? I'm doing it right now. I'm not doing it in a dissociative state. I'm actually in it. I'm in the things that I'm doing. I'm intentionally doing them. Being more present can help us identify needs. It could be physical needs or other needs. If I'm able to manage my emotions and be aware of my emotions, now I can also identify what those emotions are asking me for, what needs they're indicating. Being more present, more intentional, more self-aware, now I can make decisions. Being more present, I can be more self-compassionate. Being more present in the here and now, I can also lower shame issues. I can think about whether or not something is risking my belongingness with others, is a problem for my relationships. I'm more here and now, and I can actually work on whether or not something I've done is really actually a mistake. I can reality check better. And it can help with our adaptability to various situations. If I'm present, then I can compensate for what's going on right now rather than worrying about what's going to happen tomorrow or pondering whether or not something I did last week is going to affect something in the future. I can be much more in the now to be able to change up what I'm doing or what I'm going to do so I can adapt better. When body-based techniques are a problem. When we're working on safety planning, it's good to refer to both body and non-body based presence techniques. Experiment and change things up. Trauma is in the body, and many techniques are usually looked into using clients and subjects that have PTSD and not C-PTSD or DID. So some of these techniques won't work the same for everybody. We've found that there's problems with many people being extremely triggered by body scans or progressive relaxation techniques. Sometimes breathing techniques can be a big trigger. We're avoiding the G word for reasons, so sometimes those are problematic. Sometimes plural systems who have more problems with these different techniques, and there can be specific headmates who don't have a problem and some headmates do. So everybody's experience is going to be different when it comes to whether or not any body-based techniques are or are not a problem for them. Everybody's mileage may vary here. And please don't take it personally if certain things don't work for y'all. Be compassionate and kind to yourselves because everybody's different. Even within our system and system to system, your care team may suggest a technique that just doesn't work for you, and that's okay. Thankfully, we're going to have a whole bunch of techniques in this video for you to choose from. So some body-based techniques are a problem because the trauma response themselves, like they trigger certain trauma responses, going back to those physiological things that our body has stored up. And then, what if that somatic presence technique triggers one of those trauma pathways? Also, they can just in and of themselves trigger somatic flashbacks. Doing a body scan and paying extra attention to areas of the body without it being an external trigger can still bring up memories from that part of our body. Another thing is, when we slow down and stop and become more present in the first place, sometimes, or we get too in our body, even the in our bodiness can be part of it. All of these nervous system pending messages can suddenly start flooding. We've been out of our body, dissociated, etc., for so long that we're not used to being in our body anymore. And it's just it in itself, being back in our body, our nervous system may go, oh, you're home, here's all your pending messages, and you can end up flooding just from being back in your body. For us and for others, a lot of people in this community have chronic pain and chronic disabilities and chronic illness. And so being back in our body doesn't even have to be memories that flood. It can just be being in my body is not tolerable because of the here and now pain that I'm in. So it doesn't have to be there and then pain. It could be here and now pain. And for a lot of us also, there's either gender or body dysphoria issues, species dysphoria for those of us who are non-human. That's what Carpenter's problem was. We can have a lot of, what do you call it? Identity versus body clashes. I don't know. What do you call this? But yeah, just like various kinds of dysphoria. There's just like a bunch of them, but we put down gender or body as a reminder to us as to what we're talking about. But all of those dysphorias. We have a lot of ideas of presence techniques, but of course it's not exhaustive. We only have so much time today to talk about them. So we're offering ideas as a launch pad for your own brainstorms with your system to spark ideas and to help y'all come up with your own menus in your own safety plans or whatever, just jot them down somewhere or make wall art of it or whatever, so that you have your own menus for your system management and getting creative with presence techniques and ways to deal with time. We might find sensations that don't trigger us, that maybe give us pleasant experiences. It can be aromatherapy. It can be tactile experiences like a sensory board. They have those for people with Alzheimer's, like a lap blanket with little fidgety things on it and different textures of cloth and stuff. Weighted toys and weighted blankets, fidgets in and of themselves, like little things you can keep in your pockets and play around with, or a necklace or jewelry like a ring. So a lot of people find different sensations help them to be more present, being more in the here and now. So there's a few different techniques of practicing presence just from a purely attentional way or intentional way. One moment is bringing your mind just to this very one moment, like as small of amount of time as you can pay attention to. That's that Kairos time, that, wow, this is an amazing sunset. I'm just going to enjoy this color and the streaks in the clouds. I'm just going to be in this very moment and pay all the attention that I can to this very moment. Using time and place to emphasize presence, we I'm sitting at my computer, this is what's in front of me, I've got my monitor, I'm in the middle of recording a presentation for all of y'all, bringing myself back to time and place to emphasize my presence. Current situation also, like what am I doing right now? Not like where I am and when I am, but here I am currently giving this talk to all of y'all. Sensory surroundings. What am I hearing? What am I seeing? What surrounds me? What's the temperature of the air? My sensory surroundings. Describing things. So we can pick something in our environment and describe it in detail. I spy with my little eye. I spy this poster that we made with colored pieces of paper on it that have all of the different things that we like to think about and do. Puzzles and Princess Bride and classic rock. It's got little words all over it in different colors. I can pay attention to not just the things, but their reflections or their shadows, so I can get into details around things around me. We can describe the texture of something. The art that I was just describing is on a canvas, and it's got all this tightly woven little squares. The colored pieces, handmade paper of different colors, but they have different textures, the placement, the angle. So we can get into describing things in detail. Really being present with the things that are right in front of us. Noticing. I notice what I'm doing right now, what I'm holding, what I'm touching. I've got my headphones on, things like that, like what's around us, how we're interacting or affecting our environment. Our hands are moving and we're waving around while we're talking and things like that. And how these things feel. So not just like seeing my hand or feeling it waving around, but like when I wave my hand around, I feel the air and things like that. Pattern tracing is another one people like. In some cultures, they actually make things on purpose for pattern tracing. Yantras, mandalas, labyrinths. We can trace things by shape or color. We can make patterns. We can pay attention to empty white space type stuff. What breaks in the patterns? So if we're looking in tiles and things, often we'll notice the one that's off, or we can zoom in and out and we can look at individual small patterns, or we can zoom out more and look for the big patterns. Music. Quite often we'll listen to music we like, but we can also get really intentional and present with the music itself. So we can pay attention to the overall composition of a piece, common themes running through it, or how the composition starts out low and swells in the middle, and how it fades out at the end, or does it swell up more than once and then get calm and then swell up again, or how many stanzas are there versus choruses and refrains. And so what are the patterns of the overall composition, the repeated themes throughout it, the beat, the rhythm, the syncopation, the tempo and the changes, maybe key changes and stuff like that. Pauses. Sometimes there's that moment where nothing's happening and then they go right back into more rhythm and more singing, and so there's intentional pauses sometimes, and also paying attention to the lyrics. So there's all different ways we can get really present with our music as well. We love critter watching. We had chickens and we called it Chick TV whenever we look out the window and they were running around and doing their things and we were watching them. Be curious about the critters nearby. It could be your pets or wild animals outside and things like that. In addition to just watching them, we can also watch them, with more detail, like we've been talking about with other things. So their movement, their breathing, the colors, the textures, how the wind hits the fur, the sounds they're making. Maybe the squirrel is eating something, you can hear him. And you could also play with your pets, or if you're pet sitting, you can play with somebody else's pets. Anchoring is picking out a specific object that you can carry around with you, or that can be used as a presence anchor that you can explore or play with. In addition to the fidgets and toys, then there's jewelry. We had this big fad for the longest time of having worry stones. We have bark from a tree that was very important to us, but that got taken down in Brooklyn. We still have them. So it could be a piece of bark or something. So sensory objects and personal objects, crystals and sticks and rocks and things. So just having the thing, even if we're not touching it, can help us feel more present. So it can remind us of things. We also consider allowing to be the practice of personal or internal non-judgment and permission. So it's like a miniature surrender, allowing ourselves to float on water or allowing ourselves to fall asleep. They can be big and they can be small allowings. We usually pick a theme each year. So in 2023, we decided that was our year of allowing. We made artwork to go along with it. And we wrote all these words, all the things that we could allow around the word allowing. We had this little brainstorming session and got creative with it. So these are the things that we wanted to remind ourselves that we're allowing ourselves to do and to be and to feel. We could pick any of these things at any point to allow. Allowing ourselves to play, allowing ourselves to feel love, allowing ourselves to get help or ask for help, allowing ourselves to have boundaries, allowing ourselves some time, allowing new fronters, allowing ourselves to ask, allowing ourselves to have awe, allowing ourselves to sleep, allowing ourselves to feel gratitude, and allowing ourselves to just be ourselves. That's pretty important. Those were our intentions for the year, but you might decide some things you would allow yourselves to do. You don't have to make it a whole year-long intention, but that could be one way of getting more into the present. Inner world awareness. So there may be things that we can do in our inner world, that we can bring some of these techniques and ideas into our inner world. So we could do some earthing techniques internally. We do like a community meditation in our inner world around a tree. So we'll gather around it and literally do some earthing stuff, putting our energy down into the roots with the tree and pulling energy up. We can be present to internal events and objects. In fact, I do think that it's really cool when we have internal celebrations and internal festivals and stuff that centers around our internal culture and bring presence to those events. With permission, we can spend presence and time with each other, comforting and soothing one another. We may be able to get access to having safe or safer spaces in our inner world, making like a room for doing presence techniques or having a safer space in our inner world. Practice internal containment techniques. So if Buck's really mad, sometimes we ask him to go in the holodeck. It's like, go ahead and be mad, but be mad in there because we don't want it. So go in the holodeck and be as mad as you want. Other kinds of techniques for containment is working on boundaries internally. So each of our system members having their own specific personal space and their own specific kind of like a energetic force field, like their own aura, and containing their emotions and trying to keep their emotions, like they're allowed to feel all the feels, but the leaking to others in our system is not so great sometimes. So it's like try and keep your feels in your little personal bubble. This is our own technique called the 3 inches to the left of our body technique. And it's our technique that we use to describe how we deal with our chronic pain issues. And it's by being shifted slightly out of sync so that we are in the room with our body. We're right next to our body, but not necessarily always fully in our body. We can control it. We can keep a tab on our pain level and the body's senses and paying attention to not fall and trip over things and things like that. But we're not 100% in our body. And that helps with chronic pain and other issues like dysphoria. So we're not 100% in our body on purpose. And of course, what works for y'all, your mileage may vary. So different headmates may have different needs, triggers, sensitivities, techniques, and need to think of other ways of dealing with presence. So what works for y'all? Please feel free to develop your own techniques. Add menus of ideas to your safety plans or system management documents about different things that y'all are trying out or things that didn't work for you. You can track those too. Or it doesn't work for this headmate and it does for that one. Welcome folks in your system who want to participate in creating those documents or experimenting and playing around with techniques. And when you're doing things as a group, allow anybody who doesn't want to bow out, because not everybody is necessarily going to be comfortable with it. So when we do our little meditation around the tree in our system. We don't force anybody. Everybody's invited, and it's like a big open door thing. Even the folks in traumatime will sometimes come closer. We're always going to talk about empowerment and self-advocacy. It's important to recognize when something doesn't work for y'all. It's good to know. It's good to keep it in mind. When any kind of earthing techniques or presence techniques are an issue, you can practice a script to redirect others from either recommending or pressuring you to do those things. If listening to music is not a good idea for your system, maybe you might need to ask other people to please put on headphones when they're listening to music, things like that. So practice scripts for how to ask others to respect your needs when it comes to different types of presence and grounding techniques. When a professional is suggesting an exercise, especially if it's one they want you to do in the middle of therapy session or in the middle of, a counseling session, try and give yourselves permission in advance to say no or request alternatives. So you can also practice scripts for that, such as, I understand you were taught that breathing techniques are valuable for most people, but we cannot tolerate them. Can we select our own presence exercise to do instead? Or, that's very triggering for us. We have something else to do that helps. It's always okay to say no, request an alternative, or to ignore instructions and do your own calming, earthing, or unwinding techniques without having to explain yourselves to others, just to let y'all know. And you can have a menu of ideas that work for your system. I know we mentioned safety plan a million times, but you can add it to your safety plan. You can keep it in your system management documents. You can keep a little list in a reminders app on your phone. Whatever works for y'all, you can have this menu of ideas that you can refer to. And this way you can keep yourselves safer. So we thank y'all very much for attending. Feel free to get in touch with us if you'd like to. Check the links in the description for information about INA and how to find out more about the Liberty Bear Sanctuary in Romania. Try to help your head buddies find their way to the here and now if you can. And please take great care of yourselves.